What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut podcast version of this video. And I wanted to share with you all that one of my goals for 2024 is to actually invest a little bit more in the quality of the podcast versions of these videos. Initially, when I started dropping the podcast versions of my videos, it was just like a haphazard, part way through my editing process, I would just export an MP3 of the long version of my video with minimal editing, just in case anybody wanted it. Effectively, what I'm doing differently is I'm starting by scripting the podcast version of the video and then editing it down for my YouTube channel, rather than starting with a script for my YouTube video and then just allowing whatever rambles and fluff that I add in between to make it into the podcast version, if that makes sense. So hopefully over this year, you'll see the quality of these podcasts improve over time. One of the reasons why it feels valuable to me to invest in more long-form content like this is because there's so much nuance for so many of the things that I want to talk about. And in a 10-minute YouTube video, there's only so much I can cover. So I feel really free when I know that I can record, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or even more to talk about something and really cover all the little nuances, share my little anecdotes. So for those of you listening to the podcast version, I hope that that's something that you appreciate. Now, it's very timely that I'm investing more in these podcasts because this week's video, I have a lot of thoughts and nuanced things to express. Today, I'm wanting to tackle this question of, is it okay to charge the amount that you want to charge when you're early on in your career as a therapist? And part of the reason why it's felt important to touch on this topic is because ever since I released a video a few weeks back about how less than half of therapists get licensed, this topic of therapist pay has just been stewing in my mind. It's a problem. If you missed that video, the gist of it is there's this statistic that following folks during pandemic times, those who'd already obtained their master's degree in counseling, only half of them received their license. Actually less. It was 43% of them received their license. And the folks compiling this data looked at why people said that they didn't get licensed. And as we looked into it in that video, more than half of the folks were citing reasons related to pay and finances. So clearly, this is a really big problem. And actually, I'm super bummed because I was going to release a podcast version of that video as well because I had so many thoughts. And then my hard drive got corrupted and I lost all of that footage. So we're here now. And in general, I'd like to talk a little bit more about empowering folks around pay because clearly, this is an issue. So today we're going to tackle this question about whether it's okay to charge what you think you need to charge or what you want to charge early in your career as a therapist. And, any time in your career as a therapist for that matter, early or not. This is definitely a topic I've touched on before, but I wanted to make an entire video dedicated to this question. If you're early in your career, is it okay to charge the same amount or potentially even more than folks who have more experience within the field? Because the idea is you're early in your career, maybe you're supposed to make less because you have less expertise, which on the one hand makes sense, but on the other hand, it's often not enough to just live. So what do we do about that? I made a video several months back addressing different questions that had come up in the comments, and there was actually one commenter that asked this question specifically, and we're going to dive into it today. But to just paint the picture, I'm going to read the comment that this commenter shared. I wonder if you would do a video about choosing a pay scale as a new private practice therapist. I've found that it can sometimes feel like I'm not allowed to charge as much or more than people with more experience. But if I follow that, my practice would just not be sustainable with what it costs to live here as a younger adult who's trying to survive in this economy. I have no desire to overcharge anyone and really want therapy to be affordable. In fact, this is an area I could see myself being an activist in the future. I do want to be able to sustainably be a therapist for many years to come. That is my motivation to charge what is reasonable for me to live in my area. Anyhow, sorry for the rant. It's just been a bit stressful. I've definitely lowered my prices stresses some because I felt like I was being corrected by another seasoned therapist for charging a higher rate than her for a specialty method we both offer that is a longer service. I basically prorated this service based on my normal cost, and she just charges the same amount. Now, that is a longer comment, but I think it captures all the nuance that comes up when we have this conversation. If we try to boil all this down into a simplified equation, like I want to advocate for access to affordable therapy, we might say, well, charge an affordable rate. However, we also have to consider that as therapists, we have bills to pay. We have deferred our income sometimes by like 10 years just to go through all of our unpaid training. Most folks have also accrued 5 or 6 figures worth of student debt that they need to pay down. And also, private practice has a fair amount of overhead expenses to account for. And also, of course, the cost of living has shot up. So if you're not already a homeowner on a fixed mortgage, you might feel like, finding a place to live is getting inaccessible. So if we just said, hey, charge the amount that's affordable for your clients, then you may not be able to keep doing this job. So then what? Okay, now there's something that I really want to emphasize in this episode because I see it happen all the time. But what we tend to do as a field and as a society is we take a systemic issue of poor mental health care access and poor pay for therapists and see it as an individualized issue. Here's what I mean by that. Even though most of us tend to be in agreement that we have this huge systemic issue in our society, of course, I'm living in the US, so I'm referring to a systemic issue in the US, though, this is a problem pretty much everywhere, most likely. But I think all of us agree that in the US, access to mental health care services is incredibly difficult, and our care for those in the mental health field is also not prioritized within the healthcare system. But even though we're aware of that, when we see an individual therapist's choices and how they go about their career, we judge them on an individualized basis. So when we see somebody choose to work in private practice instead of at an agency, or choose to charge out of pocket instead of billing to insurance, or maybe choosing to charge more out of pocket than other therapists who charge out of pocket, we judge that individual therapist and say that they don't care about access to services. But we're judging the individual for a systemic issue. This is the part that I really want to rid our culture of, because if we have this huge systemic issue, we're not going to make any progress forward if we put the burden on the individual to fix the systemic issue. If as a society we care about affordable access to mental health care services, we need to make society-wide changes in order for that to happen. So while we're living in a society that doesn't prioritize mental health care services, as the individual, each person is left to just do the best they can within the context of the broken system that we're in. Okay, I know I've been hanging out on this rant for a while now, but it does feel very important to me, because if we keep blaming the individual for systemic issues, it doesn't matter whatever other tools or tips I have to name in this video, because we're just always going to keep caving in on ourselves and pointing fingers at each other when we're all just trying to do the best we can within the broken system we live in. Okay, all of that said, let's talk about whether it's actually okay to charge the amount that you want to charge, or maybe that you need to charge in order to make a livable wage when you're early on in your career or you're just kicking off into private practice. Now, I did some digging in the online forums to see what kinds of things people had to say about this topic in preparation for this episode, and one piece of misinformation that I saw floating around is that a number of folks said that we have either a legal or an ethical obligation to charge a rate that's affordable for clients. Now, unless I'm missing some ethical obligations that exist in other jurisdictions that just don't apply in my jurisdiction of the state of California, I wasn't able to find any such obligation. However, there are places where we are encouraged to consider offering a certain amount of slots that are more of an affordable rate or pro bono or donating our time in various ways. We're not obligated to, but we are encouraged to consider it. But that's a very different thing than to say that we're obligated legally or ethically to charge an affordable rate. In some of the places online, I saw people say things like you have to see how much therapists are charging in your area and then within reason kind of charge a similar amount so that therefore, if you live in an expensive area like Beverly Hills, you're probably going to be charging a lot more money than if you live somewhere that's much less expensive to live in, where charging $400 a session in Beverly Hills might make sense, but it might not make sense if you're living in a very rural town. If anything, the only legal ethical thing I could find within my state of California was from CAMF, who reminds us of antitrust laws, which basically means legally, I can't go to another therapist in private practice and say, hey, let's charge X amount of dollars for our therapy sessions and kind of have a set rate that's actually illegal. So you can charge the same amount as somebody else does. That doesn't make it illegal. But if you had a communication about it where you decided together, or it looks like you might have decided together how much you're charging and you kind of set it in stone, that's not allowed. So if you're wondering why antitrust laws exist, here's a quote from the CAMPT website about it. It says, quote, "First, concerted activity occurs when there is an agreement between independently practicing therapists. Second, courts have concluded fixing fees is a restraint of trade. Hence, independently practicing therapists who agree to set certain fees for their professional services would be violating antitrust laws. The agreement does not have to be formal or in writing. An understanding between two or more therapists that lead to parallel conduct can be sufficient to raise antitrust concerns." They give a few different examples, too, of antitrust law violations. Here's a couple of examples. One, quote, "Two separate therapy professional corporations agree to have matching sliding fee scales for their psychotherapy services." And another one, quote, "A group of independently practicing therapists agrees with one another to raise their fees by 10%. Now, that may have been more than you wanted or needed to know about antitrust laws. And keep in mind, I'm not a legal professional, and so I'm just kind of sharing what I found online. If I missed anything, please leave a comment and let me know about any legal or ethical concerns that I missed. So all of this to say, as far as I can tell, each individual therapist, particularly in a private practice setting, has the freedom to set their rate however they so choose, regardless of where they are in their career, regardless of how much expertise they have on something or not. It's simply a decision. It's not a moral decision. In my personal opinion, the only real solution to increasing access to therapy services is a radical systemic change in how we conduct our healthcare system. Now, there's no question that our entire healthcare system is broken, but I would argue that at least for those seeking support with their physical health, there's much greater access to that healthcare. And for the professionals providing that healthcare, there is a much more sustainable access to income. So even though maybe our entire healthcare system needs a complete overhaul, I would argue that at least mental health care needs to be prioritized just as much as physical health care is within our healthcare system. Again, I'm in the context of the US as I share that. But if that's all we did, then it would make it much more accessible for a lot more people to access healthcare at an affordable rate, and it would make it much more possible for therapists to earn a livable wage even early in their careers. So what winds up happening is the individual therapist tends to shoulder the burden of increasing access to care, whether they choose into it because they're trying to lean into that value of helping folks find affordable therapy, or if it was because that's just what kind of career path was available to them. So then what we see is a lot of therapists are earning hardly more income than what you could earn with, say, a high school diploma and a lot of other career paths, while carrying 5 to 6 figures of student loan debt and piling on top of that years of deferred income that you spent as a student and then as a trainee, where you could have been working earlier in your career, not carrying student loan debt, and hopefully saving money away from an earlier age. So not only are most therapists entering the career with a boatload of student debt and stepping into an income level that pays very low considering that they're graduate level trained professionals, but they're also entering their career in their late 20s, their 30s, or even later, and just starting to generate that income rather than, generating that income sooner if they hadn't been to graduate school in all those years in training. So then you end up losing like 5 or 10 years that you could have potentially been earning and saving money as well. I can't emphasize enough how much of a difference it makes to start squirreling away money early on in your career. Just a little bit of money put away in your 20s is worth more usually than putting a lot of money away in your 30s and 40s. I know a lot of us know that it's a good idea to invest in a retirement plan or some type of investment in our 20s if we can, but when I hear the numbers that go along with how this pans out, it really drives it home for me. So I'm going to share an example. Now, though it's a good idea to probably save more money than this, let's just pretend that all you did was you started to save $100 a month from whenever you started working and making a paycheck until age 65. Now, if let's say you started working at age 18 and all you did was save that $100 a month and put it into a 401k, then by age 65, you would have almost $300,000 sitting in that 401k. But if let's say because, you were in graduate school and you were a trainee not earning income, you only started saving $100 a month at age 28. And you kept saving that $100 a month until you were 65. Then at age 65, your 401k account would only have $157,000 in it. So in other words, having 45 years to save money for retirement versus 35 years has the potential to double your retirement savings. Or another way of looking at it is, you have the potential to retire sooner if you start saving earlier. My point is, if it's an option to save earlier on in life and earlier on in our career, it has the potential to pay off long-term exponentially. And when I say exponentially, I mean it literally. So for as long as we're still living in the wild, wild west of mental health care, where our current system isn't set up to support the client or the therapist well, one path to consider is building up your income early on, having a nice cushion of savings, retirement, and investments, and then from the abundance of having that financial cushion, consider giving more of your time away as you enter later phases of your career. If you're able to build your wealth early on, then maybe you can own a home with a fixed mortgage if you so choose. You could have a nice cushion of retirement and savings and emergency funds that help, decrease your stress and minimize the potential for burnout when we have an emotionally taxing field that we work in. And then from there, you might be able to even scale back your investments if you wanted to and still have the same cash flow while, giving your time away in different ways, whether it's offering your time at a reduced rate, accepting insurance, doing pro bono work, working at an agency part-time. Whatever it is that you choose to do, you can have an abundance that you give from as you choose to give back to folks who otherwise might have difficulty affording your services. Just speaking anecdotally, but from my experience, most of us who are therapists are not looking to greedily fill up our money bag and just endlessly sit on a larger and larger pile of money. But we do need to afford living in a way that feels safe and comfortable in order to offer safety and comfort for our clients. So if it's possible to build up that safety and comfort early on, then I think for a lot of therapists, once you reach a certain level of stability financially, we might then want to choose to give our time away in various ways in order to align with our values of increasing access to care. I know that's anecdotal, but part of the reason why I wanted to share that is because more than likely, if you see a therapist out there who's charging a cash rate that in your mind seems exorbitant, they're probably not being too greedy. It's probably that they're just trying to find a way to pay their bills. Now, with that said, of course, there's always folks in any field who are greedy, and those folks are out there in our field as well. But I'd venture a guess that on average, that's not the case amongst most therapists. And I mean, let's be honest, most people know that therapists don't make that much money. So if somebody was really in it for the money, they probably wouldn't be in this profession anyway. Another piece that feels worth noting, because it seems to go hand in hand with this topic, is that we know, generally speaking, folks who have more difficulty affording mental health care services tend to have higher mental health needs. I mean, it makes sense. If you're really struggling, it's hard to hold down a job, it's hard to be able to pay for services, etc. And so if we could have a shift in our culture as a field where, generally speaking, earlier on in our career, we do work with folks who are more financially equipped and a little bit more psychologically equipped. And as we go, we expect to get continued training so that we can work with folks who have higher and higher levels of needs, then this whole system could work, maybe. We need systemic change no matter what. But if we're looking at this at an individual level, it could be possible to, baby steps yourself into the field, working with folks who have enough psychological resources. And then as you go and you develop more resources financially and more resources emotionally and as far as your skills as a therapist, and we expect to get more training as we go, then we could serve folks with higher and higher needs at lower and lower pay. And as we know, currently the system is set up completely backwards from what I just said, where we work with the highest needs clients early on, where we have the least amount of training, the least amount of financial stability. And so we're putting therapists who have scarcity working with folks who have scarcity. And I don't know how we got here, but that just doesn't make any sense to me. I think I've shared little bits and pieces here and there that I can feel at this point in my career, I'm starting to hit that tipping point where I have enough of that stability financially. I would argue also psychologically, I'm just more grown up. I have more patience, more capacity to hold space for an array of experiences, more ability to empathize with a situation that I might have been quicker to judge in the past. And so I'm starting to look for ways that I can lean into increasing access to care, just little by little. One small way that I've made that change personally is, I went from raising my rate every single year to now I've gone 4 years without raising my rate. And though I still have a cash rate, just based on inflation alone, I would have needed to increase my rate by $45 a session over the last 4 years just to be charging the same amount based on inflation. So I've made a choice to essentially lower my income every year as a result of holding my rate the same. And I've noticed also as I'm exiting the fog of early parenthood that's taken over my life for the last 5 years, is I'm starting to invest in accessing trainings related to working with folks who have higher levels of emotional needs, who, tend to have fewer financial resources as well. So I will be continuing to look for ways that I can increase access to care with me while I'm sitting on, a very comfortable financial cushion to kind of keep me afloat as I keep going. Now, again, I know I have a very unconventional career path. I'm fortunate enough that I'm still in my 30s and I'm able to start making those pivots. But I could imagine somebody giving back in their 50s, for example, after, having 20 plus years of earning a more reasonable income and building up a reasonable cushion over time to then give back. All right, I know this whole episode so far is quite ranty, but these all feel like important points to make. And ultimately, the question of the video, is it okay to charge the rate that you want early in your career? The answer is yes. But I'm always helped by hearing actual numbers and doing some math, because I think what can happen is we see the cash rate that somebody charges, see that it's a pretty large number, and have that kind of sticker shock and think that that person's earning a huge amount of income, when in all likelihood, they're probably just earning a very reasonable income, or they might not even be earning that. So let me give you an example of what this could look like. So we'll take as an example an insurance-based practice where all the clients that a therapist is seeing are paying for therapy through insurance. And At best, in the United States, insurance companies will reimburse $100 per 50-minute session. It's usually less than that, but we're going to, benefit of the doubt at best. Let's say it's $100 per session. I mean, most of us first stepping into the field, if we don't know anything else and we hear $100 an hour, think that's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, yeah, if you work 40 hours a week, let's say you work 48 weeks per year, that leaves you with over $190,000 per year. I mean, that's a pretty sweet income. Okay, but let's actually start to bring some numbers that reflect reality. So first of all, if you're running an insurance-based practice, realistically, you might be able to see like 25 clients per week and call it full-time. I know folks who see more than 25, but then I'd say you're probably working more than full-time. That leaves 5 hours per day to see clients and 3 additional hours per day to take care of things like notes, billing, following up with clients, consultation, continuing education, and more. Again, generally, it takes actually more than 3 hours a day to cover those things, especially if you're billing insurance. But let's say you're seeing 25 clients a week. Then if we still do all that math, at a $100 reimbursement rate, you would make $120K per year. That also sounds not too shabby, right? But we know that on average, therapists are earning somewhere around $55,000 to $80,000 per year. So how are we getting this number of $120K? We also have to factor in that not everyone always shows up for every single session, and most insurance companies won't reimburse for a missed session. So if you don't have a no-show policy in place where you still charge a client the full reimbursement rate out of pocket for a missed session, then that's a potential for a fair amount of lost income. No-show rates can vary anywhere from like 5% upwards to like 30%. So that could actually come out to a lot of lost income. So for the person billing insurance with the $100 reimbursement rate, seeing 25 clients per week, if their no-show rate was 30%, then that would drop their income all the way down to $84,000 per year. We also have to factor in denied insurance claims, which at least for me, during my very brief stint accepting insurance 10 years ago, so it could be different now, I spent a huge amount of time contesting denied claims, and a lot of them would remain denied even after, fighting tooth and nail to try to get those reimbursements. So depending on how many denied claims you have, there's lost income there as well. And then you also have to factor in overhead costs. I mean, even if you have the most affordable home teletherapy setup, it's still quite a bit of money. You have to consider liability insurance, licensure fees, HIPAA secure means of communicating with your clients and keeping records. There's also things like continuing education and sometimes supervision that you might need to pay for. And if you're seeing clients in person, then there's definitely the expense of paying for an office as well. It's not uncommon for the yearly expenses of a solo practice to run upwards of $20,000 a year or even higher, depending on some of these variables. And then you also have to factor in that when you work for yourself, you pay taxes both as the employer and the employee, so there's some added costs there as well. So then when we factor in all of those different variables in this solo practice, seeing 25 clients a week and billing insurance that reimburses $100 per session, you might actually only see $65,000 of profits at the end of the year when all is said and done. Some folks might find that amount completely feasible to cover their living expenses, and other folks might find it impossible or just, not want to choose into it. My point, though, was to just convey that, when you see that big number that folks are charging for their cash rate, and it feels like it's a lot of money and they're probably earning a lot of money, it may not actually be as much money as it seems. So that was just an example to drive that point home. So to sum up, after all of that and a lot of technical difficulties I've had, unfortunately, making this video, it's been a minute since I started recording this. But to sum up, no matter how much you want to charge, it's okay to charge that amount. And I mean that in all directions fully, whether it's early in your career as a private practice therapist, wanting to charge more than maybe what folks are suggesting you charge early on, whether it's later in your career, whether you want to maybe charge less than what other folks are charging, or you want to accept insurance or stay at the agency job. Whatever it is that you choose, it's okay. We're all just doing the best we can to live out our career in a way that aligns with our values best. And something I want to say about taking a values-based approach to career is, you may not be able to live out all of your values at once, especially given that we're working within such a broken system. So maybe it's okay to consider allowing some of your values to take turns at different points in your career. Maybe there is a point in your career where you lean into the value of having a sustainable income or building up a foundation of savings. And maybe there's another point in your career where you lean into the value of offering affordable services to folks. However you want to play it, it's okay. And hopefully by the end of our careers, we can look back at the span of the whole thing and feel like we did our career in a way that aligns best with our values, given the context that we're in. So hopefully I've conveyed in this video that you have the freedom to do honestly whatever you want to do within, legal and ethical limits. And the decision is yours to figure out what makes the most sense given your needs, given your values, and given the system that we're working within. I hope also in making this video that I can help minimize that polarization that can happen in thought where folks either are kind of strongly holding an opinion that we have to shoulder the financial burden and offer affordable services, or folks are holding a very strong opinion that we need to be charging a certain amount or making a certain amount as therapists. I don't want any of that. I just want folks to feel empowered to make a decision that fits best for them and their life, their career, their practice, their family, whatever is important to you, that you can feel empowered to make a decision that fits you best, as long as you're within legal and ethical bounds. So there you go. Well, this podcast was a lot. I had some technical difficulties, and so I had to re-record a bunch of it in the middle, and it was like 2 hours ago that I sat down and started recording. So thank you for joining me in this extra ranty podcast version of my video, and I hope you found it helpful and supportive. I just want good things for you. I hope you feel that. And so wherever you're at in life and in your career, I support you. You're doing a good job. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this episode. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing, and they have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this episode. I have a feeling I might be making some more content about finances as a therapist in general, so if there's anything in that realm you're interested in, feel free to let me know in the comments. I do check those, even though I almost never respond. I'm sorry. I get overwhelmed. I'm a person. But I do appreciate your comments. So feel free to keep me posted in the comments with what you might hope for on this topic in the future. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.